If someone had told me 10 years ago that my life would be defined by Julian Vance, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, of course. More like that dry, papery sound that catches in the back of your throat when you're trying to pretend you're not terrified. Because even then, I was. Julian was the sun. A loud, brilliant, gravitational force that pulled everyone into his orbit. And I was the moon. Pale, quiet, only visible in his reflected light, and keeping a careful, calculated distance. We were best friends, they said. An odd pairing. The star athlete and the library ghost. It worked because our roles were clearly defined. He talked, I listened. He lived, I watched. My life was a fortress of routine. I worked from home as a translator of academic texts. My apartment was my sanctuary, a quiet space filled with the scent of old paper and brewing tea. The world outside was a loud, chaotic mess I preferred to observe through glass. My days were measured in pages translated, in the precise ritual of making my morning coffee, in the familiar weight of a book in my hands before bed. It was a solitary existence, but it was safe. Controlled. Julian was the only uncontrolled variable. He would crash into my quiet life like a summer thunderstorm, all energy and noise and the smell of rain-soaked earth. He'd appear at my door, unannounced, grinning that easy grin that always seemed to make the air in my lungs feel thin. He'd fill my small kitchen with his broad shoulders and his booming laugh, talking about a new project at the construction company he ran, or a girl he was seeing, or a trip he was planning. And I would watch him. I watched the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The way he ran a hand through his thick, dark hair when he was frustrated. The effortless confidence in his posture, the solid, grounded way he stood, as if he owned the very patch of ground he occupied. He was a masterpiece of casual masculinity, and I was the silent, devoted art historian, cataloging every detail from a reverent distance. The distance was the most important part. It was a chasm I had carefully engineered. He had his world of bright lights and loud parties and a rotating cast of beautiful girlfriends who all looked at him with the same open adoration I felt but could never show. I had my world of silent words and shaded lamps and a heart that beat like a frantic trapped bird whenever he got too close. The friendship was a masterpiece of self-deception. For him, it was easy. I was his quiet port in a storm, the one constant, the guy who always picked up the phone. For me, it was a tightrope walk over a canyon of longing. Every casual touch was a brand. Every shared laugh was a bittersweet symphony. I loved him with a silent, hopeless intensity that felt like a chronic illness. A fever that never broke. And then, one Tuesday in October, the routine shattered. The disruption didn't come as a thunderstorm. It came as a quiet knock on my door long after midnight. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. No one else came to my door. Especially not then. But when I opened it, the man standing there was not the Julian I knew. The sun had gone out. He was drenched from a sudden downpour, his hair plastered to his forehead, his usual confident posture slumped into a question mark of defeat. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed out, haunted. He didn't speak. He just stood there, dripping on my welcome mat, looking at me with an expression so lost it hollowed out a space in my own chest. Julian. My voice was a croak. He finally focused on me, a flicker of something raw and desperate in his gaze. Can I? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I stepped aside, and he stumbled in, bringing the cold, damp night with him. He was carrying a single duffel bag that he dropped by the door as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. And just like that, the careful distance I had maintained for a decade was gone. The uncontrolled variable was now inside my fortress. He told me it was over with Sarah. His girlfriend of 2 years. The one everyone thought he'd marry. He didn't offer details, just mumbled a few broken sentences about a fight, about things ending. Just for a few days, Leo, he whispered, his voice rough. Just until I figure things out. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. My quiet, ordered world had been invaded. And the terrifying, secret part of me sang with a hope so fierce it felt like sacrilege. The first few days were a strange, silent ballet. He was a ghost haunting the edges of my apartment. He spent most of his time on my couch, staring at the blank television screen, or sleeping a dead, dreamless sleep that seemed to offer no rest. He barely ate. He barely spoke. This was a Julian I had never seen before. The vibrant energy that always surrounded him had collapsed inward, leaving a vacuum of profound stillness. And I, the observer, had a new subject. A subject I could study up close, without the usual dazzling glare. I started to notice things. Small, human details I'd never been close enough to see. There was a faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. I noticed the deep calluses on his palms and fingers, a map of his life's work written in hardened skin, when I saw his hand resting on the arm of the couch. I saw the weariness etched in the fine lines around his eyes, lines that were usually lost in the force of his smile. He looked breakable. Julian Vance. Breakable. The concept was so foreign it felt like discovering a new law of physics. One night, I found him asleep on the couch, his head at an awkward angle, his breathing shallow. He'd kicked off the throw blanket I'd left for him. The apartment was cold. My routine demanded order, and a man shivering in his sleep was a disruption of that order. That's what I told myself. I picked up the soft wool blanket, its weight familiar in my hands. I moved quietly, my own breathing suspended. As I leaned over to drape it across his chest, my hand brushed against his arm. It was an accident. A fleeting, millimeters-deep contact of skin on skin. But it felt like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up my arm, seizing the breath in my lungs and setting my heart into a frantic, panicked rhythm. Heat flooded my face. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. He didn't stir. He just shifted slightly, murmuring something incoherent in his sleep. I stood there for a long time, frozen in the dim light of the living room, my pulse hammering in my ears. My hand tingled, alive with the phantom sensation of his skin. It was just a touch. A meaningless, accidental touch. But in the silent, secret language of my own heart, it was a confession. A scream in a library. I retreated to my room, my sanctuary, but it offered no peace. The fortress had been breached from the inside. Slowly, over the next week, a new dynamic began to form between us, built in the wreckage of the old one. He was adrift, and I, in my small, predictable world, became his anchor. The power had shifted. He, the one who had always led, who had always seemed so capable and sure, was now lost. He didn't know how to work my coffee maker. He looked at the contents of my fridge with a kind of helpless confusion. One morning, I found him standing in the kitchen, holding a can of soup and a can opener like they were alien artifacts. "How does this thing work?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost embarrassed. And for the first time in 10 years, he was asking me for help. I became his caretaker. I was the one who made the coffee in the morning, leaving a mug for him on the counter. I was the one who cooked simple meals, nudging a plate towards him without a word. I was the one who provided the quiet, stable space for him to simply exist while he figured out how to put himself back together. He started talking. Not about Sarah, not about the breakup. Just talking. He'd tell me about his day at work, about a problem with a supplier, or a difficult client. He was talking to me not as his audience, but as his confidant. The change was subtle, but profound. He was seeing me. Not just as the quiet friend in the background, but as a person. And I was seeing him, stripped of his usual armor of confidence. The space between us, once a vast chasm, was shrinking. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. My meticulously constructed walls were crumbling, brick by brick. And I found I didn't have the strength, or the desire, to rebuild them. The turning point came on a Thursday. Rain lashed against the windows, a relentless drumming that seemed to insulate my apartment from the rest of the world. We were in the living room. The only light came from a single lamp in the corner, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. We hadn't spoken for an hour, just sat in a comfortable silence that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. He was on the couch, I was in my usual armchair. The air was thick with unspoken things, heavy like the storm-filled sky outside. Then, he spoke. His voice was low, cutting through the sound of the rain. It wasn't about her. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read. My heart gave a slow, heavy thud. The breakup, he clarified, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. With Sarah. It wasn't her fault. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest. This was it. The door to the mystery, creaking open. She's a good person, he continued, his voice strained. She deserves someone who can give her everything. Someone who isn't a liar. The word liar hung in the air between us, sharp and ugly. You're not a liar, Julian, the words left my mouth before I could stop them. He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. Aren't I, Leo? He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were dark with a pain so deep it stole my breath. I've been lying my entire life. To everyone. To myself. The silence that followed was a physical weight. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. I ended it, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, because I couldn't stand the thought of looking at myself in the mirror for one more day. Because she was talking about marriage, about kids, and all I could feel was this suffocating panic. He took a shaky breath. Because I can't give her what she wants. Because I'm not built that way. My mind was racing, trying to assemble the pieces, terrified of the picture they might form. He finally said it, the words so quiet they were almost carried away by the storm. I'm gay, Leo. The world stopped. The rain, the shadows, the frantic beating of my own heart, it all just stopped. 3 words. 3 words that dismantled a decade of carefully constructed reality. The chasm between us, the one I had so carefully maintained, the one I had built on the bedrock assumption of his untouchable straightness, wasn't a chasm at all. It was a phantom. A lie I had told myself to survive the truth of my own feelings. He was still looking at me, his expression stripped bare, a terrifying mix of fear and plea. He was waiting for a judgment. A reaction. And in that moment, all my own fear, my own years of hiding, fell away. All that was left was him. The boy I'd known forever, the man I loved, looking at me as if I held his entire world in my hands. My own confession rose up, unbidden, a truth I had swallowed for so long it had become a part of my bones. I know, I whispered. He flinched, a flicker of hurt in his eyes. You knew. No, I clarified, my voice shaking slightly. Not about you. About me. Understanding dawned on his face, slow and then all at once, like the sun breaking through storm clouds. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a dawning wonder. The space between the armchair and the couch suddenly felt immense, an ocean of lost time. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him rising from the couch. Maybe it was me standing from the chair. Maybe we met in the middle, drawn together by a gravity that had been denied for too long. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He smelled of rain and soap and something that was just Julian. He raised a hand, hesitant, and gently touched my cheek. His calloused fingers were rough against my skin. The touch wasn't like the accidental brush in the night. This was intentional. A question. And I leaned into it, closing my eyes, a silent answer. The first kiss wasn't passionate. It wasn't desperate or frantic. It was slow. Questioning. It was a conversation held without words. His lips were soft, tentative against mine. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and salt and years of unspoken longing. It was the sound of a wall finally crumbling to dust. In that dim, rain-soaked room, I wasn't the moon anymore. And he wasn't the sun. We were just 2 people, finding each other in the dark. The world came back into focus with the gray light of dawn. My first thought was a single, sharp note of panic. What have I done? I was in my own bed. Alone. The space beside me was empty, the sheets cold. I sat up, my heart starting its frantic, familiar drumbeat of anxiety. The apartment was silent. Too silent. The comforting quiet of my solitude had been replaced by a hollow, ringing absence. Julian. I called out, my voice thin in the morning air. No answer. I got out of bed, my feet cold on the wooden floor. I walked into the living room. The couch was empty, the blanket folded neatly at one end. His duffel bag was gone from its spot by the door. He was gone. A cold dread, thick and suffocating, settled in my stomach. It was a mistake. My mind, my greatest ally in analysis and my worst enemy in matters of the heart, began its vicious spiral. He'd panicked. Of course, he'd panicked. He'd just blown his entire life apart, confessed his deepest secret, and I had taken advantage of his vulnerability. I had pushed him. I had projected my own years of pathetic, secret longing onto his moment of crisis. He was probably disgusted. With me. With himself. The kiss, which had felt so honest and right in the dark, now seemed cheap and predatory in the harsh light of day. I replayed every moment. The way I'd leaned into his touch. The way I'd answered his unspoken question. Had I imagined the reciprocity? Had it just been a moment of confusion for him, a desperate reach for any kind of comfort in the storm of his own emotions? And I had been that comfort. Convenient. Available. The self-recrimination was a physical thing, a sickness coiling in my gut. I had ruined everything. Not just a potential future I had foolishly allowed myself to imagine for a few short hours, but the past, too. 10 years of friendship. The one solid, unchanging thing in my life. I had shattered it with a single, selfish act. He had come to me for safety, and I had made him unsafe. The day passed in a blur of silent torment. I tried to work, but the words on the page were a meaningless jumble. Every sound from the hallway made me jump, my heart leaping with a stupid, desperate hope, only to crash back down into the abyss of silence. My apartment, my fortress, had become a prison. Every corner of it held his ghost. The couch where he'd slept. The kitchen where he'd looked so lost. The empty space by the door where his bag had been. My quiet, ordered life had returned, but it was tainted. The solitude I had once cultivated as a shield now felt like a punishment. It was the absence of him, a tangible, aching void that consumed all the air in the room. I checked my phone 100 times. No calls. No texts. The silence was his answer. It was a confirmation of all my worst fears. He was gone. He had run from me. The second day was worse. The frantic anxiety had subsided into a dull, heavy ache of resignation. I had been a fool. A romantic, idiotic fool who had mistaken a moment of shared desperation for a genuine connection. Julian Vance was a sun, and suns don't orbit quiet, pale moons. They burn bright and move on. I had just been a temporary shadow for him to rest in. I told myself it was for the best. I would rebuild my walls, stronger this time. I would go back to my routine, to my safe, predictable world. I would forget the feel of his hand on my cheek, the taste of rain on his lips. I would forget. It was a lie, and I knew it. There was no going back. He had breached the fortress, and even in his absence, the damage was done. He had shown me what my quiet life was missing. Him. Late that afternoon, there was a knock on the door. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. I told myself it was a package delivery, a neighbor, anything but him. Hope was a dangerous, sharp-edged thing, and I couldn't afford to be cut by it again. I walked to the door like a man walking to his own execution. I looked through the peephole. And the world stopped for the second time in 3 days. It was him. He looked wrecked. If he had been a ghost before, now he was a man who had wrestled with ghosts and lost. There were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He looked exactly how I felt. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door. I opened it, and we just stood there for a moment, the silence of the hallway stretching between us. He was holding his duffel bag again. "I'm an idiot," he said, his voice raw. It wasn't the opening I had expected. All the bitter, self-deprecating speeches I had prepared in my head dissolved into nothing. "I panicked," he said, looking at his feet. "Leo, I am so sorry. I ran. Not because of you. Because of everything." Saying it out loud, to you, it made it all real for the first time. And I broke. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were full of a desperate, pleading honesty. I spent the last 2 days driving around, sleeping in my truck. Thinking about how I've spent my whole life running. From this. From myself. And then I realized, the one place I've never had to run, the one place I've always felt real, was here. With you. The air left my lungs in a rush. The cold knot of dread in my stomach began to melt, replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. I thought you regretted it, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. I thought I'd pushed you. A pained expression crossed his face. No. God, no, Leo. That kiss, it was the first honest thing I think I've ever done. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us. The only thing I regret is running away the next morning. I hurt you. I saw it on your face before I even opened the door. Can we talk? I just nodded, stepping back to let him in. He dropped his bag in the exact same spot by the door. A homecoming. We sat in the living room, not on separate pieces of furniture this time, but together on the couch. The space between us was charged, but not with tension. With possibility. I've been in love with you for years, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The confession, once my most terrifying secret, now felt as natural as breathing. If I was going to be honest, I was going to be completely honest. He didn't look surprised. He just looked sad. How could I have been so blind, he murmured, more to himself than to me. I think I was, too. I just didn't know what to call it. It was just, you. You were this quiet place in my head I could always go to when the rest of the world was too loud. I thought it was just friendship. I didn't let myself think it could be anything more. He turned to me, his gaze intense. I'm scared, Leo, he admitted, his voice low. I have no idea what I'm doing. My whole life, the one I thought I was supposed to have, just burned to the ground. I'm scared too, I said, and the admission felt like a release. But maybe we can be scared together. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time in weeks. It was like seeing the sun rise after a long night. Okay, he said softly. Okay. Scared together. I can do that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, small, brass key. It was attached to a simple metal ring. He held it out to me. This is for my apartment, he said. The one I haven't been able to go back to. I'm not asking you to move in or anything crazy. I want you to have it. So you know. So you always know that you have a place to find me. No more running. From you, or from this. I looked at the key resting in his calloused palm. It was more than a piece of metal. It was a promise. An anchor. A tangible act of commitment in the face of so much uncertainty. I closed my hand around his, the cool metal of the key pressing into my skin. Okay, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He didn't let go of my hand. He just laced his fingers through mine, holding on tight. And we sat there, together on the couch, as the afternoon light faded, no longer a sun and a moon, but two stars, finally finding their place in the same constellation. The days that followed were a study in a new kind of quiet. Not the empty, solitary quiet of my old life, but a full, shared silence that was more comforting than any conversation. Julian stayed. His duffel bag remained by the door, but it was no longer a symbol of temporary refuge. It was just a piece of luggage, waiting. Our new routine was built slowly, piece by piece, like one of the structures Julian built for a living. It started with coffee. Every morning, we would stand in my small kitchen, often not speaking, and move around each other in a simple, domestic dance. He learned how my coffee maker worked. I learned that he liked his with too much sugar. Our hands would brush as we reached for the milk or for a mug, and now, the touch wasn't a jolt of panic. It was a quiet reassurance. A simple, grounding fact. You are here. I am here. We are here. The evenings changed, too. My armchair gathered dust. We would sit together on the couch, the length of his body warm and solid beside me. Sometimes I would read, my head resting on his shoulder, the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing a better metronome than the ticking of my clock. Sometimes he would talk about his day, the words no longer a performance, but a genuine sharing. I learned the names of his crew, the intricacies of architectural plans, the unique frustrations of a delayed concrete pour. And he would listen as I talked about the challenges of translating a particularly dense passage of German philosophy, his focus absolute, as if my quiet world of words was as fascinating as his loud world of steel and wood. We were learning each other's languages. Sleeping was the biggest change. The first night after he returned, there was a moment of awkward hesitation at my bedroom door. An unspoken question. He had started to head for the couch, the old habit kicking in, and I had simply said his name. Julian. He stopped and looked at me. I didn't say anything else. I just held his gaze and left the bedroom door open. He understood. That night, lying in the dark, I was not alone. The vast, empty space of my bed was now filled with his presence. I could feel his warmth, hear his soft breathing. The anxiety that usually accompanied closeness was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. A feeling of rightness. He rolled over, his arm coming to rest around my waist, pulling me gently against his chest. It wasn't a gesture of passion. It was a gesture of belonging. His chin rested on the top of my head, and I could feel the rumble in his chest as he murmured, "Is this okay?" I fitted myself against him, a puzzle piece I never knew was missing finding its place. "It's okay," I whispered back into the darkness. And for the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep without fear. I began to see my old life, my fortress of solitude, with a new clarity. It hadn't been a sanctuary. It had been a waiting room. A place I had stayed because I was too afraid to open the door and see what was on the other side. I had mistaken safety for happiness. Julian had not been a disruption to my life. He had been the beginning of it. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that revealed the first half of the book was just a prologue. I looked at him one morning, standing at my kitchen window, bathed in the early sunlight. He was drinking from the mug I'd set out for him, his brow furrowed in concentration as he looked at something on his phone, probably a work email. The light caught the silver scar in his eyebrow. His shoulders, which had been slumped in defeat just a few weeks ago, were broad and straight again. The sun was back. But it was different now. It wasn't a distant, dazzling star I could only watch from afar. It was here, in my kitchen. And its warmth was for me. He must have felt my gaze, because he looked up and his face broke into that easy, familiar grin. But the grin was different, too. It wasn't for the world anymore. It was for me. "What?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Nothing," I said, a smile of my own spreading across my face. "Just thinking." Thinking that my quiet, ordered world hadn't been shattered. It had been completed. Thinking that for 10 years, I had loved a version of Julian I had built in my head, the confident, untouchable star. But the man I had fallen truly, deeply in love with was the one who showed up at my door in the rain, the one who didn't know how to use a can opener, the one who was brave enough to be terrified and honest enough to admit it. I had spent a decade watching him, and I realized I hadn't truly seen him at all. Not until he let me see the parts of himself he kept hidden from the world. Not until he came home.